Assalamu alaikum and hello to my non-Muslim viewers. Today we're going to be talking about two sources of information in regards to learning about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We're going to be talking about Ibn Ishaq's Seerah, or Ibn Ishaq's biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and we're going to be talking about the works of al-Tabari. That's basically Tariq al-Tabari, which is history of al-Tabari, and Tafsir al-Tabari. Tafsir al-Tabari is a commentary on the Qur'an. Now, before I begin with the problems with both Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari and why I have to explain these problems, I need to give a little background information on who these two people were. Let's start with Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq was one of the earliest biographers of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Basically, he wrote a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which many of the Orientalist or Western critics of Islam or many critics of Islam say it's the earliest biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and that's not true. And that's one of the things I'll be talking about later. But anyways, his full name was Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasser, and he was born in Medina, current day Saudi Arabia, which was Arabia back at the time, but now it's Saudi Arabia. And he was born in 702 Christian era. And he died in Iraq in 150, let's see here, let's say 80 years after, he lived for 80 years and he died in Iraq. But anyways, basically Ibn Ishaq wrote, like I said, he wrote the earliest biography, one of the earliest biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was, he learned a lot about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by going to, places like Egypt, Iraq, etc., etc. So he basically, any like oral reports of the Prophet Muhammad, any, earlier written records of the Prophet Muhammad, basically what Ibn Ishaq did was he took all those records and he wrote down, one of the earliest biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, one of the problems with Ibn Ishaq's biography is it doesn't exist anymore. Basically, what happened was in the 20th century, a French Orientalist or a French scholar by the name of Alfred Gulam, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, but let's just call him Alfred for now. Basically, what happened was Alfred in the early 19th century translated the work of Ibn Ishaq into English, and the way he reconstructed Ibn Ishaq's work was he went to another source called Ibn Hisham. Basically, what Ibn Hisham did was he edited and he copied Ibn Ishaq's work and he incorporated it into his own work. So Ibn Hisham was another early biographer of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He wrote after Ibn Ishaq, and basically what Ibn Hisham did was he took he copied down Ibn Ishaq's work and he incorporated it into his own. And I'll get into Ibn Hisham later, but that's basically what happened. Ibn Ishaq's work no longer exists. It doesn't exist anymore. It's lost to us forever. What we have is a reconstruction of it by this French scholar Alfred Gulam, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. But anyways, basically he translated Ibn Ishaq, and if you go to any bookstore or any Islamic online store or whatever, or any Islamic bookstore or whatever, you can find Ibn Ishaq's book. And you can find it. You can find quotations of it in any book on Islam, whether it's an anti-Islamic book or an anti-Islamic website, wherever. Like this book quotations from this book are popular, especially on the internet and with internet or Islamic critics or Islamic polemics of Islam, especially Christian critics of Islam quote a lot from Ibn Ishaq. What about al-Tabari? Basically, al-Tabari was another person who was another early biographer of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He wrote an entire volume set about world history. He wrote about the history of Iran, the history of the Middle East, the history of Christianity, the early history of Jesus, peace be upon him. All this stuff. Al-Tabari wrote an entire volume set about world history, about basically everything. And al-Tabari volume 6 through 9 are about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or is a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And al-Tabari also wrote a commentary on the Quran, and that commentary is called Jamil al-Bayan fi Talwi al-Quran. Basically, it's called Jamil al-Bayan for short. Basically, it's a commentary, or it's a tafsir. It's a book of tafsir. It's a commentary on the entire Quran. And this is a multi-volume set. I think it's 32 volumes, and it's available in Arabic and in English. It's available in places like Lebanon and stuff like that. You can buy the entire tafsir set, the 32 volume set, and it's also available online. I think that entire tafsir of al-Tabari, or that entire commentary he wrote on the Quran, is available online. I don't know the entire website, but if I do find that website, I will post it below for those who are interested. So basically, Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari were one of the earlier biographers of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And al-Tabari, of course, wrote one of the earliest commentaries on the Quran. But it's not the earliest. The earliest commentary on the Quran is a commentary by a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and that's Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas wrote a commentary on the Quran, and that's called Tafsir Ibn Abbas, and that's also been translated into English, and there are websites that have that entire commentary. So that was the earliest commentary. Then about like 100 years later, or 120 years later, al-Tabari wrote his commentary. So basically, why I chose to make this video was I saw a debate which took place in December last year, which is 2011, and in this debate there was a debate between a Christian and a Muslim, and the Christian apologist was Samuel Green. He was talking about, and the topic was, is Muhammad a prophet of God? Which in my mind, which to me is a very broad or very big topic, which is basically undebatable, because in order for the Muslim to, prove that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a prophet of God, he would have to disprove the divinity of Jesus. He'd have to disprove the crucifixion. He'd have to disprove the resurrection. Now, all that stuff can be easily disproven, but it takes a lot of time. And then, you have to answer the charges about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, these polemics about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then you got to provide evidence for his prophethood, which is basically miracles, prophecy, basically, the miracles he did, the prophecies he did, and there are a lot of miracles he gave, and a lot of prophecies that were fulfilled, and you would have to disprove allegations of the Quran and prove the scientific accuracy of the Quran, the prophecies of the Quran. So anyways, this is a very, very big topic, and the Muslim apologists, foolishly fell for that trap. Because basically what Christians want to do is, what Christian apologists and polemics want to do is, they want to debate, is Muhammad a prophet of God? And Muslims sometimes fall for that trap, because that topic is undebatable, because that topic is too big. That topic, there are a lot of subtopics related to that one topic. But anyways, that's why I'll never debate that topic, because it's too big. I got debate, invitations to debate that topic, and I always say no. that topic can't be done because it's too big. It's, you know, there's just too many subtopics related to that topic. It's impossible to debate it. But anyways, okay, one of the subtopics that was brought up in that debate was Ibn Ishaq. Basically, the Christian apologist Samuel Green said that Ibn Ishaq was the earliest and most reliable biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And when I was watching the debate, I thought to myself, this guy is completely ignorant, because Ibn Ishaq is not the earliest biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That is a gross, that is a, no, I don't know if that person was just, you know, ignorant, or, you know, if he was just lying, but Ibn Ishaq is not the earliest biography, and it's certainly not the most reliable. So that's what motivated me to make this video. Now you might say, well, who was the earliest biographer of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if it's not Ibn Ishaq? And the answer to that is the person who wrote the earliest biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Hazm, and he basically lived about 35 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if I'm correct. 20 or 35, I'm sorry, 25 or 35 years, something like that. And basically, you know, he was the earliest biographer of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was the son of Abu Bakr, if I'm not mistaken. And Abu Bakr was one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And but anyways, he wrote the earliest biography. So basically, you know, 35 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and some Muslim scholars even say, you know, earlier, like right after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died, this person, Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Hazm, wrote, you know, a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have a very, very early biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The problem is, you know, his work doesn't exist anymore. Either it was lost, or it was destroyed, or it got absorbed into, you know, other works like Ibn Ishaq and stuff like that. But anyways, he wrote the earliest biography. And then another person who wrote earlier than Ibn Ishaq was a person named Musa ibn Uqbah. And basically he lived about 80 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And what Musa ibn Uqbah did was he wrote about the battles of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the life of the Prophet, and he mixed those into one complete biography. And according to Imam Malik, you know, this biography, the biography of Musa ibn Uqbah, was considered the most reliable, or the most trustworthy source of information. And Imam Malik said the same thing about Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, but we don't have that work anymore. So anyways, you know, so basically there are two scholars, or two early Islamic scholars, who wrote about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, before Ibn Ishaq. So that claim that Ibn Ishaq is the earliest biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is false. There are Muslim scholars who wrote before that. Now, what's the problem with Ibn Ishaq? You might be asking. Well, the problem is a lot of anti-Islamic, you know, critics of Islam constantly quote from Ibn Ishaq to badmouth the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. For example, they'll say, "Oh, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ordered, you know, killings and all that stuff." And when Muslims say, "Well, where are you getting these stories from?" or he ordered assassinations or whatever, Muslims ask, you know, where are you getting these stories from? And most of the time, the critics will say, or not most of the time, you know, almost like 98% of the time, they'll say, we're getting these stories from Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari. And they'll say, Ibn Ishaq is the earliest biography, and al-Tabari is also one of the earliest biographies, so, you know, it's the earliest source. It's there, you know, it's the earliest source. Another source they'll quote from is Ibn Sa'd, and I'll get to the problems with, and he's also problematic. I'll get to the problems with him later. But anyways, like, so what's the problem? So what did Muslims have to say, early Muslims have to say about Ibn Ishaq? Was Ibn Ishaq considered the most reliable biography like Musa ibn Uqbah? And the answer is no. Now, one of the things I want my listeners to remember is just because a source is early, it doesn't mean that source is reliable. You see, there's early truth and there's early falsehood, and we should be interested in early truth, not in early falsehood. So just because a source is early, it doesn't mean it's reliable. It just means it's early. There's early truth. Again, like I said, there's early truth and there's early falsehood. In the same thing applies with any religion. Like Christianity, for example. You know, the New Testament is early. Yes, Paul is early. The Gospels are early. But you know, it's early and it's false. You know, there's no reliability to the New Testament, and I'll be talking about that later. I'm not going to jump into, you know, New Testament criticism in this video. But anyways, early just means early. You know, there's early falsehood and there's early truth. An early source of information just means it's early. You know, it doesn't mean it's reliable. So just because something is early, it doesn't mean it's reliable. It just means, you know, it's early. I just want people to know that. So what's the problem with Ibn Ishaq? The problem is Ibn Ishaq has been condemned for his poor methodology of compiling information. In other words, Ibn Ishaq was never ever considered a reliable biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Early Muslims, you know, rejected him, and even Muslim scholars today reject him. Ask any sheikh or any Islamic scholar, and they'll say the same thing I'm saying: is Ibn Ishaq is not reliable. Basically, Ibn Ishaq has been condemned by great scholars such as Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal for being careless in compiling his information. Now, is that it? Are those the only scholars that condemned Ibn Ishaq? And the answer is no. Many other scholars also attacked Ibn Ishaq. Scholars such as or Hadith scholars such as al-Nisaya and Yahya ibn Qatan, who are basically students of, you know, early Islamic history and Hadith issues and stuff like that. And for those of you who don't know what Hadith are basically actions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it's not true that the Hadith came, you know, 200 years later. It's not true that Bukhari was the first person to write a Hadith book. No, that's not true. They're very, very, you know, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we have evidence that the companions or the immediate disciples of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who are eyewitnesses, who are, you know, basically Prophet Muhammad's disciples, wrote down Hadith. We have evidence for that. But I'm not going to be getting into, you know, Hadith preservation and Hadith issues. Inshallah, in the future, I will make another video on that, dealing with the entire Hadith methodology. In this video, I'm just going to be focusing on Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari. But anyways, you know, there's several scholars who have said that Ibn Ishaq is not a reliable source of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. These include Yahya ibn Qatan. Basically, Yahya ibn Qatan would never quote from Ibn Ishaq. He was one of the earliest scholars. Ahmad ibn Hanbal's son admitted that he incorporated many of Ibn Ishaq's traditions into his Musnad, or his Hadith collection, but he never paid heed to them. Al-Nisaya, who was also an early Hadith scholar, said that Ibn Ishaq was not strong. He was not a strong a source of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Yahya ibn Sa'd said that even though he knew Ibn Ishaq in Kufa, which is in you know, modern day Iraq, Yahya ibn Sa'd would abandon him intentionally, and he would never quote down any of the traditions on Ibn Ishaq's authority. When Imam Malik, his full name is Malik ibn Nas, whenever he heard the name of Ibn Ishaq, he would say Ibn Ishaq is an antichrist. Ibn Ishaq is a liar. That's what Imam Malik, an early muhaddith or an early hadith scholar, said about Ibn Ishaq. He said that Ibn Ishaq is a liar. He's one of the Dajjals. He's an antichrist. And you know, people, and that was a huge blow to Ibn Ishaq back in the day, back in the early days of Islam. Basically, Ibn Hashim bin Urwah was told that Ibn Ishaq reported, whenever Ibn Ishaq reported something from Fatima, which is his wife, he said, Hashim ibn Urwah said that Ibn Ishaq is a liar, and he doesn't want Ibn Ishaq near his wife. And Suleiman al-Daimi, who was another early Islamic scholar, called Ibn Ishaq a liar. And I will quote and you can look for the descriptions and the source of and where I'm getting, you know, these quotes from in the description below. So basically, Ibn Ishaq, you know, he was condemned by scholars for being careless in compiling his information. Ibn Ishaq has been condemned for his poor methodology of compiling his information. Early Islamic scholars, and I listed several of them, you know, condemned Ibn Ishaq. They didn't take him seriously. In fact, Imam Malik, like I said, Imam Malik called Ibn Ishaq a liar. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal, you know, basically discounted the reliability of Ibn Ishaq. And there's several other scholars, like, for example, Imam ibn Nuwayr said that Ibn Ishaq reports false stories without proper chains of transmissions, and you know, Muslims know them as Isnads, from various unknown people. So the thing is this: of course, people are going to lie about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. People lied about the Prophet during the time of the Prophet. Of course, people are going to lie about the Prophet after the time of the Prophet. That's why we as Muslims, and you know, early Muslim scholars who lived during and you know, immediately after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had the Hadith methodology. So what does the Hadith methodology do? The Hadith methodology tells us if something is early and true. And the Muslims understood this, you see. The Muslims did not wait hundreds of years in order to start the Isnad system. The Isnad system began right away after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's death. Two of the companions, or two of the disciples of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, applied this. Abu Bakr applied it. Abu Bakr applied the Isnad system. Umar ibn Khattab applied the Isnad system. May God be pleased with them. May Allah be pleased with them. So you see, this writing of hadith and evaluating the chain of transmission and the isnad and all that started immediately after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It started with the disciples or the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, and I will be posting the sources of information in the links below. What about al-Tabari? Basically, al-Tabari warns people at the beginning of his book that his books are filled with both weak and authentic information. And Ibn Ishaq collected several weak or false stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he put them into his volumes, volumes 6 through 9. So, and I will be, you know, quoting that statement below. So basically, you know, al-Tabari is admitting that his books are filled with weak or inauthentic sources of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You know, this is basically, this is what al-Tabari basically admits on al-Tabari volume 1, page 13. Same thing with Tafsir al-Tabari too. Tafsir al-Tabari was, like I said, a commentary on the Qur'an, and it also has stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The problem is, you know, most of these stories, they don't contain any chain of transmission. They don't contain any isnad. And so, you know, Muslim scholars say that, you know, Muslim scholars don't accept the stories about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Tafsir al-Tabari because there's no chains of transmissions or whatever. There's no isnads. So basically, you know, Ibn Ishaq and Tariq al-Tabari are weak. Muslim scholars don't accept these sources on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So you might be asking, well, what is the best biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? And that is Ibn Hisham. Basically, what Ibn Hisham did was he took out what was weak from Ibn Ishaq's biography. So basically, he edited a lot of Ibn Ishaq's stuff. He took out like a lot of false stories, a lot of these, you know, fake poetry was in Ibn Ishaq's biography. Ibn Hisham took it out, and you know, he basically cleaned up Ibn Ishaq's work. A lot of false stories, for example, the satanic verses, which is in Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham took out because, you know, he thought of it as a fabricated story. He thought of it as weak. So the best biography, the best early biography about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is Ibn Hisham's biography. He wrote 4 volumes, and you can purchase this. You can purchase this online. You know, you can go to Amazon.com and purchase it. Another good biography is Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir wrote a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a multi-volume set. Again, you know, this is available in bookstores, Islamic bookstores, or Amazon.com or whatever. So the 2 most reliable biographies of the Prophet are Ibn Hisham and Ibn Kathir. Those are biographies I recommend and other Muslim scholars recommend, because Ibn Hisham, you know, took out a lot of weak stories or fabricated stories from Ibn Ishaq. I think same with Ibn Kathir, or I could be mistaken, but with Ibn Kathir. But I know for a fact that Ibn Hisham is considered more reliable than Ibn Ishaq, because, you know, Muslim scholars have made this clear. And again, I will be posting my sources for my information in the links below. So basically, you know, if any, you know, critic of Islam comes up and says, you know, Ibn Ishaq says Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did this or that, or he's quoting from al-Tabari or Tafsir al-Tabari, the problem is, you know, these are weak sources. Muslim scholars have never, ever, ever accepted Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari as reliable sources of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because they know that Ibn Ishaq was you know, known as a liar. He wasn't considered reliable, and al-Tabari also admits that, you know, he collected a lot of weak sources of information regarding Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Basically, Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari, they didn't use the Isnad system. You know, so they collected all kinds of stories without checking for their authenticity, and that's a problem. And that was a problem, you see. So when a lot of these critics of Islam, you know, they're ignorant. They don't know anything about Hadith studies or Islamic studies or what Islamic scholars have to say or anything like that. And again, Ibn Taymiyyah, who, you know, us Salafis highly respect, gave reasons why, you know, people like Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari collected, you know, fabricated stories into their works. And I will post that description in the I will post that saying of Ibn Taymiyyah in the links below, or the description box below. So basically, you know, that's what I want to say about Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari. You know, I'm getting sick and tired of, you know, critics of Islam, whether it's Orientalists or Western critics or modern day, you know, Western academics, or these Christian, you know, critics of Islam, you know, quoting from Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari. You know, a lot of these Christian websites quote from Ibn Ishaq saying Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did this and that in order to badmouth him. And they also quote from al-Tabari saying Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you know, did this, blah, 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 blah. You know, he did all this, you know, bad stuff. And, you know, they're quoting from, you know, al-Tabari. When al-Tabari, when they fail to, you know, read what al-Tabari has to say about his own works, which is, you know, that al-Tabari is admitting that they're false or fabricated stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And, you know, there are so many false stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in al-Tabari's work. I remember, you know, a Muslim scholar actually wrote an entire volume set called The Authentic and the Weak Stories in al-Tabari, where he lists all, like, the weak stories are the weak stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the companions of the Prophet. Al-Tabari also wrote about the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He wrote about Abu Bakr, or Umar ibn Khattab, Ali, etc., etc. May Allah be pleased with all of them. And he also collected false stories about the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, this tells you, the poor methodology or the poor job Al-Tabari was doing in collecting his information. And again, I will provide that entire, or the author of that volume set in the links below. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Basically this video is a response to everybody, a response to all the critics of Islam, the Western academics about Islam, the Orientalists of the past, etc., etc. They always quote it from, in their works or in their lectures or whatever, to this very day. They quote from Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, and Muslim scholars, have always made it clear that these are weak sources, and they're not, and Muslim scholars reject these sources. So, I'm going on way too much. I think, I'm 30 minutes in, 31 minutes in. I apologize if this video is long. So, wrapping up what I said, just because something is early, it just means that it's early. Just because something is early, it doesn't mean it's reliable. There's early truth and there's early falsehood. We as truth, if you're a truth seeker like me and other Muslims, you should be interested in early truth. And Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari aren't reliable sources of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So critics of Islam and these Western academics and these critics of Islam, whoever they are, whether they're white people or Christians or I don't know, like Orientalists or whatever, they need to quote from authentic sources of which Muslim scholars, which us Muslims consider reliable. Sources like Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Imam Malik's al-Mutawa, Ibn Ishaq, stuff like that. They need to quote from reliable books, or reliable that we Muslims consider reliable. Quoting from Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, it's not going to cut it anymore, because Muslims are coming out and saying, no, these sources aren't reliable, and I gave the reasons why they're not reliable. So that's what I want to say about that. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. So basically, people lied after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Ibn Ishaq collected these lies or these fabricated stories and put them into his Seerah, or his biography. And Al-Tabari did the same. He didn't apply the proper methodology of collecting accurate or reliable information, and he admits this in the beginning of his book. So I will have, all my quotations, all my evidence in the description below. I hope this video helps Muslims understand that Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari aren't reliable. So whenever, they go to an anti-Islamic website, or they hear this from, a critic of Islam, they can be educated and know in their head that, Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari aren't reliable sources of information about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That's about it. Inshallah, in the future, I will have more videos about Christianity and Islam. I apologize for taking so long. I've just been busy, but thanks for watching, and assalamu alaikum.